I'm starting on a new project today. This is the timber frame, which is Jennifer's house, and some of this old lime plaster has been crumbling and flaking off, and there's wide gaps. You can see up there, there's like a maybe ½ inch to 3/4 inch gap up there between the plaster and the straw bales, and so it's just breaking off. There's also moisture getting in pretty easily, and so I need to fix it, and I'm going to redo it in lime plaster. One of the things that you may notice is that underneath this lime plaster there is earthen plaster. Some people at Dancing Rabbit did this early on when they were building straw bale houses, is they put earthen plaster underneath. I'm not sure why, but the lime tends not to bind very well to the earthen plaster because they sort of take up moisture at different rates, and then eventually it just kind of separates and flakes off like that. So what I'm doing is I'm just going to remove all this earthen plaster down to the bare straw bales, and then I'm going to start again with all lime plaster. Normally when people build with straw bales, they stack the courses like bricks, sitting flat with the straw ends toward the outside and inside, so they can maximize the width of the insulation and provide a wider surface to build up the wall on. But you can see the timber frame was built with the bales on end like this. Now I'd expect that would give you a flatter surface to plaster on, but I'm amazed that despite doing this, this wall is still incredibly wonky. The straw ends tend to be easier to plaster onto because the ends allow more spaces for the plaster to key into and grab onto, so it'll adhere better. One thing that I'm noticing here is that these bales were wire tied with steel wire, and there's corrosion happening, and this is just broken all the way through. It's just corroded all the way through. That's a piece of wire that's supposed to be holding together the bale, so that means the end of this bale is just going to be loose. Not sure what I'm going to do, because loose bales are a really horrible thing to be trying to plaster onto. So this will be tricky. What you sniffing, man? What do you smell? Jump up. The idea with this initial coat is to get it worked into the bales well, and maybe fill in just a little of the deep spots. Straight plaster works best for the bond to the bales, and then a mixture of straw and lime plaster will help fill in the gaps. In my early years at DR, we had a lot more work parties when people were building houses. There were also a lot more natural buildings being built then, and natural buildings require a lot of labor. But people would have plastering parties, and a bunch of people would come by to help get a wall knocked out in no time. There were also bent raisings and timber frame buildings. Most of the houses going up lately have been more conventional buildings, and in my opinion, not very interesting. These are intended to go up quickly and be built by construction workers who are all paid. The crews are smaller, and although a lot of these houses are very tightly built, they aren't natural. There are a couple of exceptions in the last few years. Liz is currently working on Sub-Hub, which will be a sub-community space and is a straw bale building right behind the timber frame here. After finishing that first coat, I put up burlap to keep the wall from drying out so fast, and to protect the plaster from the direct spray of water from the hose nozzle. I kept watering the wall a couple or a few times a day to prevent it from drying out entirely. This allowed the lime to progress in the process of carbonation back into calcium carbonate. A lot of people don't do this part or don't put much care into it. The plaster will still dry and be somewhat solid, but it won't go through the process of carbonation that's necessary to make a really durable surface that will hold up for decades. It's pretty firm, but it's not completely, because you can still kind of bust into it like that. But it's also not been even a whole week. So this second coat, I'm mixing it with straw because I really want to even it out, because this is just so wonky. It's got really deep parts that I need to even everything out so that I have a flatter surface to work with. I'm also putting down a little bit of a thin layer of just straight plaster so that the straw has something to stick to as well, because the straw itself doesn't have enough plaster on it to really stick to the plaster that's there. Another thing you want to do is make sure you wet down that base coat really well so that you don't get that suction happening where it's sucking the moisture out of the plaster, and it won't cure as well that way. But if you do keep it moist for at least like 3 or 4 days after, we've got a spell of warm weather right now, and so that's what I'm working within. And I'm not even sifting the sand because I'm not really worried about the bigger pieces in here because it's a thick coat, and it's only really going to be the last coat that I'm going to need to sift the sand for. Yesterday I was working on this fill-in layer, and I worked up to about here, so you can see how this is fairly even down here, and then up here it's just so uneven and wonky. And so I'm going to continue right now and finish this spot up, get everything even. I'm going to leave it for the winter, I think, because we're getting so close to really cold weather. I don't think I'm going to get a chance to really do much more after that. So that's what we're going to try to do, and we'll leave the rest of it for the springtime. I soak the straw for at least 10 minutes before adding it to the plaster. That way it doesn't draw water from the plaster and make it drier. You need a pretty wet mixture of lime plaster to incorporate straw. For a lot of the straw, I was just using what I'd taken off the wall when I was trying to even it out. The west wall bales were sticking out past the south wall bales on the corner about 6 inches in some places. I took a few inches of straw off the ends of the bales, but still ended up having to fill in a lot of the wall to make it flat. Okay, well, I finished that second coat and I filled in all those deep gaps on this wall, and it's pretty smooth. And I'm not going to do any more for this season. I think it'll hold up for the winter. It's too late in the season to get started on the finish coats of plaster. So I'll do that in the spring. And when you think of the difference between this job that I've done here and the previous plaster that was on here with the earthen plaster underneath the lime plaster, this stuff it's all lime and it's really bound to those straw bales. So I think this is going to hold up for many decades into the future. But in the springtime, I'll be coming back here and I'll do at least one more coat on it. I'll probably do one more filling coat to get it smoother and flatter, and then I'll do that finish coat on it. And both of those will be fairly thin. Next season, not only will I do the finish coats on this wall, but I think I'm going to do redo this whole western wall, because that's pretty much in the same shape as this wall was before. It was a bigger project. I didn't want to try to start that at the very end of the season, but I'll probably get going on that because it was the same situation, earthen plaster underneath lime plaster, and it's cracking and peeling off. It's also a very wonky shaped wall too. So if I can get these two walls done, I think this cabin addition on the timber frame will be in good shape. I'm also going to try to get some new window operators. There's a few windows on it, these casement windows that don't work, and so if I can get those, get some screens on the windows, this cabin will be in really good shape for future tenants. This timber frame cabin was one of the first buildings to be built at Dancing Rabbit Ecovillage, so it's been a long time. Dancing Rabbit's been around for 23 years now, and I think this one was built in 1999. So yeah, it's pretty old now. It's needing some TLC. If you don't already follow the Hardcore Sustainable Instagram page and Facebook page, go ahead and follow those and sign up to subscribe here, share the video with your friends, and we'll see you next time. Oh, and before I forget, Jennifer does want to sell the timber frame, so if you're interested in buying this amazing house, you just got to move to Dancing Rabbit Ecovillage and become a member.